A lot of people have been asking, when will SHTF start, or has it started already? But I think a better question right now is, how long do we need to prepare to survive for? Because we are already in SHTF in many ways. But we have historical data that we can actually reference in regards to how long this whole thing can last. And based on what's happened in the past, I'm here to tell you it could last quite a while. And if you're preparing for the long haul and you know things are going to get very tough here very soon, then hit the subscribe button below, because these are the conversations we need to have in order to stay ahead of the curve. Now, one of the things that we can reference based on our current economic situation here in the United States is the Great Depression. Okay? Now, the Great Depression lasted for 10 years. It lasted for a decade. But SHTF, in regards to the Great Depression, will probably last even longer than that. So hold on for a second, I'll give you some historical data points so you can get some ideas about what we should expect, how long things are going to take, and just how long this whole thing can play out for based on what happened in the past, all right? So, the Great Depression started in 1929 basically, and a lot of people pinpoint it to the day October 29th, which was also known as Black Tuesday, which is when the stock market really crashed. Obviously, that caused a ripple effect throughout the entire world, and then suddenly everybody's in the Great Depression. Now, the worst years of the Great Depression were 1932 and 1933. You have to understand, we said it started in 1929, and the worst years of it were 1932 and 33. So 3 and 4 years after that Black Tuesday moment is when things got really, really bad. And we're talking, the bread lines, everything you can think of when it comes to the Great Depression, people starving, everyone unemployed, all of that happened the worst in those 2 years. So if we think about what happened in 2020, we consider that to be our Black Tuesday moment when it comes to what happened economically around the world, well, we're actually still a year or two away from the worst of it based on what happened during the Great Depression. Just throwing that out there, historical reference, just giving us some timestamps here, all right? Now, what happened in those years, just to give you some ideas? Well, in 1932, the gross national product fell 13.4%, and unemployment rose to 23.6%. So we're not seeing those exact numbers right now, but I think that's something we should be watching out for as an indicator to just how bad things are getting. And obviously, unemployment and GNP or GDP, and all those are intertwined in many ways, is something that we keep an eye on based on the fact that it's a very big economic indicator, okay? Now, in 1933, some other very interesting things happened, okay? There was a third bank panic run in March of 1933, and that was the year that President Roosevelt was actually inaugurated. So understand that these bank runs have been happening, but the third one happened that year, and it was a big one, a huge panic, all right? Now, what's also interesting is that the newly elected Roosevelt at the time actually faced a possible military coup because of how bad things were getting and because of his, let's just say, more socialist style of thinking when it came to how they were going to solve the problem of the Great Depression. And a lot of people felt that the New Deal was going to basically turn the country into some kind of communist or socialist republic. But that being said, this coup was actually led by some familiar names in the business world like JP Morgan and DuPont, and they basically tried to recruit up to 500,000 soldiers to stage a military coup, and then they tried to recruit a general by the name of Smedley Butler, who basically reported it and said, hey, Congress, these people are trying to literally create a military coup because they don't like what the president's doing to try to fix the Great Depression, and it was stifled because of that. But understand that 4 years after everything started with the Great Depression, a military coup was a real reality. And there was a lot of interesting things happening in regards to the government and how the bigwigs in the corporate world felt that they were handling the current situation. Just throwing some of that out there based on historical data, what we could expect to see in the future if things keep getting really bad. Just wanted to throw that out there, but I will say the military coup, the stagers of it were trying to put together some kind of fascist-style government modeled after what was going on in Italy with Mussolini. So not necessarily the best idea either, and obviously we know what Italy participated in come World War II. Now, in 1939, the Depression was mostly over. So, like I said, 10 years after everything started. Now, the world was facing this depression as well. It wasn't just the United States. I mean, everything is very intertwined even back then. But understand, okay, that in 1939, one of the reasons why the Depression began to end was because the US borrowed $1 billion and spent it on building up the military, which was probably a good idea because also in 1939, Germany invaded Poland. So understand that the way the Great Depression ended, 10 years of strife throughout the country of people struggling and being unemployed and having no homes or whatever else it was, it ended with the beginning of global conflict. And of course, that lasted until 1945. Now, on the other side of 1945, the USA became the world's first economic superpower. And of course, we had a very good few decades after that in order to establish ourselves as the global superpower, both economically and militarily. But that being said, now we're talking 16 years after the start of the Great Depression is when things finally started to turn around. But 6 of those years were involving a global conflict. So I'm here to tell you that we're probably in this one for the long haul. And the problem is that we can't necessarily store up enough food to get through 10 years of absolute strife. We probably can't store up enough food to deal with 16 years of chaos around the world. But what I can say is that the more food and the more storage you provide yourself with, the longer you'll have to deal with some of the challenges that will be coming with such a Great Depression too. The other thing to keep in mind is that the way a lot of people dealt with the Great Depression was they had skills to offer for bartering purposes for the things that they needed. And there was a lot of reusing and recycling that would happen where people were taking every last bit of every purchase they made and using it for some sort of benefit within their home. And people got very, very good at adapting to their environment and making whatever they had to do work. So this is something to keep in mind, that building skills now and having a way to barter yourself, not just your stuff, not just things you buy, not just your preps, but bartering yourself as someone who's skilled and necessary in that environment is going to be a big deal in order to get through a decade of depression, if not 16 years, with 6 of those years involving global conflict. This is a very big deal because we are literally witnessing and experiencing the same exact things they were back then right now, but we're just not in the worst part yet. And there's a lot of things that can come up before that happens. So I wanted to make this video because a lot of people are saying, like, when is SHTF going to start? I feel like it should have really gone off back in February or March, And my thought process is, look, we've been in it for a couple of years now. But just like in the Great Depression, things didn't get as bad as they could get until about 3 or 4 years in, because that's when finally enough people were affected by it that the breadlines became an established situation, which fed thousands and thousands of people. And in fact, during that time, many people from the rural environments actually moved into the cities to find more work because where they were was extremely poor and there were no resources. So the only way for them to try to find some inkling of an income was to move into the city. Very interesting, is it? When you think of these things in a different kind of mindset, the idea of everyone fleeing for the hills only works for some situations. Whereas in this scenario, people left the hills for where there was even a tiny bit of money. So I wanted to bring this to your attention. You should be prepared to have a rough 10 years. You should probably be prepared to even have a rough 16 years. And honestly, I hope I'm extremely wrong about all this because I like living and I don't want the next 10 years to be terrible. But we also have to be prepared for things to get even worse in the next year or two, just based on the historical precedent set by the Great Depression. So, if you want any other information on the Great Depression, make sure you go to Such Double Ott's channel, Sensible Prepper, because he has 2 channels. And on the Sensible Prepper channel, he's got a great video all about the Great Depression. And I'll go ahead and link that up here on the screen so you guys can check that out if you'd like, because there's a lot of great lessons learned from that time. And I think that the information put out in that video is very valuable. But I wanted to give you something to think about. And I also wanted to, give you some timelines to kind of consider based on where we're heading so you don't underestimate just how long this whole thing can go on for. Without anything else to say about it, that's going to be it for Magic Prep.